Gloria Whitman had learned to count every coin long before she realized she could no longer remember the last time she bought something simply because she liked it. Her mornings began at 5:30 while Detroit still hung between sleep and waking, under the pale yellow wash of streetlights that nobody had bothered to replace with anything brighter. She boiled water in a dented aluminum kettle, poured it through an old metal filter chipped at one corner, and stood leaning against the sink with her coffee, watching steam crawl across the small kitchen window, until the glass became a mirror that showed nothing but fog and the faint ghost of her own face. The house had once been a place with a different kind of weight to it. Frank's work boots by the door, the Sunday smell of chicken turning gold in the oven, his low humming drifting from the bathroom while he shaved some old Motown tune he never got the words right to, but never stopped trying. 2 years since the cancer took him, and the boots were gone to Goodwill. The oven hadn't seen a whole chicken since the funeral, and the humming had been replaced by the specific silence of a house that remembers sound. What remained were walls that held their breath, and bills fastened to the refrigerator door, with magnets shaped like fruit lemons and strawberries pinning down numbers that could make a person sick if she looked at them too long. She folded the electric bill and placed it on top of the hospital stack. 14 months of chemotherapy, 3 emergency admissions. One ambulance ride on a Tuesday afternoon when Frank collapsed in the backyard trying to fix a sprinkler head he had no business fixing. The insurance covered what it decided to cover, which was never quite enough, and the rest settled onto Gloria's kitchen like sediment at the bottom of a river, heavy, ordinary, impossible to ignore, and going absolutely nowhere. Her shift at St. Jude Memorial's gift counter began at 7. She tied her hair back, buttoned her gray cardigan, locked the front door, and drove 6 miles through streets that smelled like wet asphalt and exhaust. The work was light but repetitive, in a way that made time move strangely, stretching some hours into days and collapsing others into minutes. Get well soon cards with flowers printed on recycled paper, bouquets made of silk and wire, stuffed bears wearing tiny hospital gowns that were meant to be charming but always struck her as faintly morbid. She smiled at customers, wrapped their purchases in tissue paper, handed them their change, and rarely spoke beyond what the transaction required. People came to that counter because someone they loved was hurting. They were not looking for conversation, and Gloria understood that the kindest thing she could do was to be efficient and invisible. That afternoon, walking up the cracked concrete path to her front door, with her purse over one shoulder and her feet aching inside shoes that needed replacing, she stopped at the mailbox. The thick envelope sat upright between a credit card advertisement and a water bill. It did not look like anything she usually received. The paper was stiff and white. Her name was printed in a clean serif font across the front, not scrawled by hand the way collection agencies address their letters, as if even the handwriting wanted to seem hurried and aggressive. She carried everything inside, set her purse on the kitchen table, hung her cardigan on the back of the chair, and only then picked up the envelope again. She tore it open carefully along the top edge, the way she handled everything. Now slowly, deliberately, as though rushing might cause something fragile to break. The letter was from a law office in Chicago. Caulfield, Brewer and Strauss. The name meant nothing. She read the first paragraph standing up, then read it again, and then pulled the chair out and sat down because her legs made the decision before her mind caught up. Rose Calloway had passed away. The name landed in her chest like a stone dropped into still water. She had not heard it spoken aloud in decades. In the architecture of family memory, Rose existed only as a silhouette, the older sister, who stayed behind the woman Gloria's mother Dorothy had described with a tight jaw and careful words, the way people talk about a scar they don't want to explain. Someone who lived alone in a house that meant more to her than people did. Someone who was best left undiscussed. Gloria kept reading. She was the sole heir, no other relatives, no complicated conditions. The inheritance was a property in upstate New York, a guest house that Rose had operated alone for most of her adult life. Attached to the property was an overdue tax payment. 30 days to resolve it, or the county would begin seizure proceedings. She let the letter fall flat on the table and pressed both palms against the wood, as if the table might drift away. The kitchen clock ticked with a sound she normally never noticed, but that now filled the room like a slow, distant heartbeat that belonged to someone else. A guest house. She had never been there. She had never seen a photograph of it. She had only the vaguest recollection that the family had once owned such a place somewhere green and far away before everyone scattered before Dorothy moved to Detroit with a young husband. And a grudge she carried like luggage she refused to set down. Gloria's first thought was not hope. It was arithmetic. If there was furniture left inside old dressers, nightstands, maybe a few porcelain pieces, they could be sold. If the land still held value, it could be negotiated. If the total was enough to clear that stack of bills on the refrigerator, she might keep this house, the only place in the world that still smelled faintly of Frank when the heating vents kicked on in winter. She stood up to pour herself a glass of water and noticed for the first time in months the bottom of the pile on the refrigerator door. A bill had been pinned there so long, it had faded where the magnet pressed. She pulled it free. Frank's last prescription receipt, the one from the pharmacy on Gratiot Avenue, filled 4 days before he died. She turned it over because the back had a crease as though it had been folded and refolded many times. And there in Frank's handwriting, shaky by then, the letters listing slightly to the right, the way a man lists when he's walking into wind, were 4 words. Remember to call Rose. Gloria held the receipt under the kitchen light. Frank had never mentioned anyone named Rose. Not once in 31 years of marriage. Not during the long drugstore runs. Not during the nights when morphine made him talkative and strange, and he told her things she had never heard before about a dog he'd had as a boy, about a fight with his brother at a funeral, about how the color of the sky the morning they got married was the same blue as the inside of a mussel shell. He told her all of that, but never once said the name Rose. She folded the receipt and slipped it into the pocket of her house dress. The kitchen went on ticking. That night, she did not turn on the television. She sat at the table under the overhead light with the letter spread flat and a small spiral notebook open beside it. Gas for the drive, she estimated the distance, looked up the route on her phone, calculated fuel cost at current prices. Food on the road, she would pack sandwiches, buy coffee only when necessary. Time off work. She had 6 personal days remaining never used, because taking a day off felt like a luxury that belonged to someone with savings. She wrote each number in her careful slanted hand, added them up, subtracted the total from what remained in her checking account, and stared at what was left. It was not comfortable, but it was possible. She called Claire. Her daughter picked up on the 3rd ring, and the background noise, Theo's voice asking something about homework. A cabinet closing placed her immediately in the small apartment in Philadelphia where Claire had lived since the divorce. I got a letter today from a law firm in Chicago. Claire's attention sharpened audibly, the background sounds falling away as if she'd stepped into another room. What kind of letter? A woman named Rose Calloway died. She was your grandmother, Dorothy's older sister. She left me a property, a guest house up in New York. Silence. Then Claire's voice, careful and flat. The tone she used when she was already 3 steps ahead and didn't like where the path led. What's the catch? Overdue taxes, 30 days. So sell it. Use the money to clear the medical bills. Don't make this complicated, Mom. Gloria looked at the receipt in her pocket, the corner of it just visible above the fabric edge. I'm going to drive out and look at it first. Look at what? It's a building you've never seen owned by a woman you never knew. There's nothing to look at. There's paperwork to sign. I'm going to look at it first. The call ended, the way their calls often ended. Not with anger exactly, but with the specific friction that occurs between 2 people who love each other and solve problems in fundamentally different ways. Claire saw the world as a series of equations. Identify the variable, isolate it, solve. Gloria understood the appeal of that approach. She had raised Claire, after all, during years when the math of survival was the only math that mattered. But she also knew, had learned it the hard way, sitting beside Frank's hospital bed watching numbers on a monitor that told her everything and nothing, that some things could not be solved. They could only be walked into slowly, with both eyes open. 3 days later, she packed. The suitcase was old, a hard-shell Samsonite, in a color the manufacturer had probably called champagne, but that age had turned into something closer to the yellow of a bruised apple. She folded 3 sets of clothes: her toiletry bag, a flashlight, a box of granola bars, and a thermos. She locked the front door, checked it twice, and got into the car. The sedan was a 2009 Ford Taurus with 162,000 miles on it, a passenger side mirror held in place with electrical tape, and a rattle in the dashboard that appeared every time she hit a bump and disappeared every time she took it to the mechanic. The car started on the second try. She pulled out of the driveway and turned east. The drive from Detroit to upstate New York took longer than she had calculated. The interstate stretched flat and gray through Ohio, the land on either side brown and stubbled with last season's corn. She passed small towns whose names she forgot immediately, gas stations with hand-lettered signs advertising bait and ammo, rest stops where the bathroom smelled like industrial soap and the vending machines charged $2 for a bottle of water. She stopped twice for gas and once to eat a peanut butter sandwich in a parking lot while watching a family of starlings fight over a French fry on the pavement. Every stop was an expense. She recorded each one in the notebook on the passenger seat. Pennsylvania rose into hills, the road curving through forests that were just beginning to think about turning green. She crossed into New York in the late afternoon, the light shifting from the flat white of overcast skies to something warmer, as if the sun had been waiting behind the state line. The GPS guided her off the highway and onto a 2-lane road that narrowed steadily, the houses growing farther apart, the trees growing closer together, until she turned onto a dirt road with no sign and no center line. And the voice on her phone announced that she had arrived at her destination. The road wound through a corridor of old-growth maples and oaks, whose branches met overhead in a canopy that filtered the late sun into coins of gold scattered across the windshield. She drove slowly, the sedan rocking gently over ruts and soft spots, and then the trees opened and the house appeared after a bend in the road. It was larger than she had expected, but not in the way that overwhelms. It was large in the way that makes a person realize something had once been beautiful here, genuinely and carefully beautiful, and that the beauty had not vanished but only grown tired and sat down. The front porch ran the full width of the house, its wooden rail leaning slightly inward, as if the whole structure had taken a long, slow breath and not quite finished exhaling. The planks of the porch floor had darkened to the color of strong tea. The windows were shuttered. The curtains behind them faded to a uniform pale that might once have been blue or green or yellow. The front garden had surrendered to wild grass and dandelions, but the old stone path that led from the road to the porch steps was still visible, its edges sharp enough to suggest that someone had laid those stones with the expectation that they would be walked on for a very long time. Gloria turned off the engine and sat with her hands on the wheel. There was no sound except the ticking of the cooling engine and the wind moving through the treetops with a steady, unhurried whisper. She opened the door and stepped out. Her shoes crunched against the gravel. The air smelled of old wood-damp earth and something green and alive. The key had arrived with the envelope from the law office. It was old brass, heavy for its size, with a simple bow and a long shank that looked like it belonged to a door in a different century. She held it in her palm and looked at the front door, a solid panel of dark wood with a brass knob that had gone green with oxidation. And for a moment, she stood perfectly still, aware that she was about to step into a story she didn't know the beginning of. She inserted the key and turned it. The lock resisted, then gave with a dry click, and the door swung inward with a long, low creak that traveled through the floorboards and up through the soles of her shoes. The interior was darker than outside. She stood on the threshold, letting her eyes adjust, and the house assembled itself around her in stages. First the shapes, then the textures, then the details. She stepped in. The wooden floor announced each step with a soft groan, the sound of old joints flexing after years of stillness. The air was cool and carried the quality of a space that had been closed up not in haste, but with intention, the way a person closes a book they intend to return to. A long table stood in the center of the living room, its surface dulled by dust, but its wood still showing the warmth of something polished many times over many years. Wooden chairs were arranged around it, not pushed in carelessly, but placed each one square to the table edge, each one waiting. A few framed photographs hung on the walls, their glass clouded but their frames level as if the house itself had been holding them straight. Gloria moved to the nearest frame and wiped the dust away with her sleeve. The photograph showed a family standing in front of this house on a day when the sun was high and the shadows fell short. The faces had blurred with time, but they were clear enough to see that the people were standing close together. Not posed close, but genuinely close, the way people stand when proximity is not an arrangement but a habit. She walked deeper, one room at a time. The kitchen with its heavy iron stove and deep porcelain sink. The dining room where a long sideboard still held a row of candlesticks. The staircase rising in a straight line to the second floor, its banister worn smooth by decades of hands. Everything was old, but nothing was disordered. The house had the quality of a place whose occupant had left very slowly and very deliberately, putting each thing in its proper position before closing the door. She returned to the living room as the light outside softened. She pulled her suitcase through the front door and set it against the wall. That first night, she wiped down the long sofa with a cloth from her bag, opened one window. The sash stuck, then slid up with a sound like a gasp, and spread her thin blanket over the cushions. She lay down and looked up at the ceiling, where the wood grain ran in long unbroken lines from one end of the room to the other. The wind touched the window. She closed her eyes. Morning arrived through the thin curtains like a hand gently placed on her shoulder. The light stretched across the floor, illuminating scratches and scuffs. She hadn't seen the evening before a map of years of footsteps and furniture legs, and dropped things and recovered things. Dust motes floated in the beams with the slow grace of creatures that had nowhere to be. She sat up slowly. Her knees protested the night on a couch too short for her body, and she pressed her palms against them and waited for the stiffness to recede the way she waited for everything now patiently without surprise. From outside came the sounds of birds, the rustle of leaves, the layered quiet of a place where silence was not absence, but the presence of many small sounds that hadn't learned to compete. In Detroit, she rarely heard that kind of quiet. She went into the kitchen and turned the faucet. The pipes shuddered, coughed, and released a thin stream that ran rusty for a few seconds before clearing. That was the first good sign. She set the kettle on the stove, found a burner that clicked to life on the third try, and searched her bag for instant coffee and the travel mug whose outer paint had worn away to bare metal where her fingers always gripped. While the water heated, she observed the kitchen more carefully. The wall cabinets were solid wood dovetail, joined the kind of carpentry nobody did anymore. A row of small brass hooks was mounted beneath the lowest shelf. Tablecloths were folded neatly in a drawer ironed into crisp squares that held their creases. A set of porcelain dishes rimmed in blue were stacked in a lower cabinet, only lightly chipped, each one separated by a square of felt. She opened a low cabinet beside the back door and found the notebooks. They were covered in cloth, a faded floral cotton, and tied with cotton string. The first was a list of seasonal menus written in a hand that was small, round, and extraordinarily even. Apple pie in September, onion soup in winter, mint lemon tea for hot days. Each entry was annotated with observations: too much cinnamon this year. The Hendersons preferred their eggs soft-boiled. The couple in room 4 sent a thank you card. The second notebook was a reservation ledger. Guest names, arrival dates, departure dates, and notes that transformed each entry from a record into a portrait. Room 3 needs an extra blanket, the wife gets cold. Mr. and Mrs. Whittaker like strawberry jam with breakfast but won't ask for it. The Lewis child is allergic to pecans, make sure the cookies are safe. Gloria turned the pages slowly, her finger pausing on annotations that were brief, but so attentive they felt almost intimate, the work of someone who understood that hospitality was not performance, but observation. Then between a note about ordering more Earl Grey tea and a reminder to replace the porch light, a different kind of entry. Call Dorothy in Detroit. If she does not answer, try again Thursday evening. Gloria's hand stopped. Dorothy. Her mother. The woman who had spent a lifetime describing Rose Calloway as someone who cared about nothing but a house and had cut her family loose. And here was Rose's handwriting in the same steady script used to record breakfast preferences, noting a phone call to her sister, like it was just another task in the ongoing work of keeping a household running. She turned more pages. The entries continued menu changes, supply orders, and threaded among them at irregular intervals lines that did not belong to the guest house at all. Send money for the furnace repair before winter. Do not sign the name. Gloria read that line twice. She thought of the winter she was 11 when the furnace broke in January, and the repair bill arrived already paid. Dorothy had said it was a church fund, or maybe a local program. She couldn't remember which explanation exactly, only that her mother had seemed uneasy in the way people are when telling a story they haven't fully rehearsed. She closed the notebook and held it against her chest. She stood in the kitchen of a house she had never seen before, thinking about furnace repairs and phone calls made on Thursday evenings, and the distance between the story a family tells about itself and the story that actually happened. Near noon, she began opening all the first-floor windows one by one. Each window was a small battle-swollen frames, corroded latches, sashes painted shut, and each one, when it finally gave, released a rush of air that smelled like grass and sunlight, and the faint mineral sharpness of damp earth. She found a broom cleaning rags and a tin bucket in the utility room behind the kitchen. Every small task made the house feel less like a stranger's possession and more like a place deciding whether to trust her. The sound of a vehicle reached her through the open windows. She walked to the door. A dark blue pickup truck was parked under the shade of the nearest tree. The woman who climbed out was in her late 30s, brown hair pulled into a high knot, wearing jeans and a loose-sleeved flannel shirt, carrying a tray covered with a checkered cloth. She spoke first, her voice pitched to carry across the yard without shouting. "You must be Gloria Whitman." Gloria stepped onto the porch and nodded. "I'm June Holloway. I live past the creek end of the road. Heard someone came to take over the guest house, so I brought blueberry muffins. They're better warm, but they'll keep." Gloria looked at the tray, then at the woman holding it. "Thank you. You didn't have to. People here still do this kind of thing." June smiled and held the tray out. "At least they used to." Gloria leaned aside to let her step onto the porch. June looked around. The way a person looks at a face they're trying to reconcile with a memory. Not Gloria's face, but the house's. "I used to come here all the time when I was little. My mother helped Miss Rose in the winters, cleaning rooms, changing linens, odd jobs when the pipes froze. I'd sit on the stair steps, eating cookies and listening to the guests talk. Better than television. You knew her." June tilted her head, choosing her words. "In the way a child knows an adult who lives alone." She wasn't friendly, not the way people use that word. But she was never unkind to me. She lent me books, real ones. Once she mended my coat after I tore it on the fence wire, and she never mentioned it to my mother. Just handed it back the next week with the tear gone. In my family, nobody told it that way. June's eyes acknowledged the gap. Not everyone here liked her either. Miss Rose didn't talk much, kept to herself. But she remembered everything. People's birthdays, what they liked to eat, who needed help but was too proud to ask. June glanced past Gloria into the house. "Have you seen the breakfast room in the back yet?" "No, the door sticks. You have to lift the handle a little before you push. It's been that way since I was 8 years old." After June left, Gloria followed the narrow hallway behind the kitchen. She found the white painted door, its lower edge scabbed with peeling paint. She lifted the handle and pushed. The door swung inward onto a room that stopped her in the doorway. It was narrow and filled with garden-filtered light, soft green alive. 3 window frames looked out over the back of the property where untended rose bushes had gone wild but not dead, their canes arching over a narrow brick path that disappeared behind a line of low trees. Inside, a round table covered with a lace cloth yellowed at the folds. 4 wicker chairs and a small glass-fronted cabinet holding empty jam jars arranged by size. On the windowsill, a tin box with a floral pattern faded to watercolor softness. Gloria opened it. Polaroid photographs, faces she didn't recognize. A few Christmas cards. Slips of paper covered in the same round handwriting. One read, "Remember to call Detroit on Thursday." Another, "Send money for the fall semester. Do not put a name." The handwriting was identical to the kitchen notebooks, the same person. The same habit of embedding private urgencies between mundane tasks, as though both belonged to the same list. Fall semester. Money sent without a name. She did not yet know which semester or whose education, but the deliberateness of anonymity tugged at something she couldn't see clearly, the way a thread sticking out from a hem signals a seam coming undone. She sat in one of the wicker chairs and looked through the dusty window at the garden. The brick path led somewhere hidden behind the trees. Her phone vibrated. Claire's name on the screen. "You're really there." Her daughter's voice arrived without greeting, shaped not as a question, but as a verdict. "Yes. How long are you planning to stay?" "I don't know yet. The lawyer called me this morning. She said the house owes back taxes and a decision has to be made fast. Don't drag this out. If someone wants to buy it, sell it." Gloria looked at the slips of paper on the table. "I only got here yesterday. That's exactly why you shouldn't get attached. It's just an old house, Mom. I'll call you back later. Don't turn something simple into something complicated." The call ended. Gloria set the phone face down on the lace cloth. She gathered the slips of paper, placed them back in the tin box, and closed the lid until it clicked. Then she stood and walked out the back door onto the brick path. The bricks had sunk and tilted, pushed apart by grass roots and the slow, patient pressure of soil. Wild daisies grew over the edges. The path led between the rose bushes and through a gap in the low trees to a small greenhouse. Its frame was white-painted iron, almost entirely peeled. Several glass panes had cracked and been patched with clear plastic that had yellowed. The door was half-closed, hinges red with rust. She pushed it open. Inside, wooden shelves for pots, a small work table, an iron chair with a curved back. On the table sat a tin watering can, seed packets so old their paper had gone soft as cloth, and a thin notebook wrapped in brown leather. Gloria picked it up, brushed the dust from the cover, and opened the first page. Another list of guest house tasks, but between the practical note sentences of a completely different nature. Change the linens in room 2. Buy more Earl Grey. Send pastries to the Holloway house when the little girl recovers from her fever. Call Dorothy in Detroit. If she does not answer, try again Thursday night. She turned the pages and her hand stopped moving. That blue coat of little Claire's probably doesn't fit anymore. Ask June if there's still someone in town who does knitting. Rose had known the name of Gloria's daughter, had tracked the child's growth from a distance, noting coat sizes the way the reservation ledger, noted breakfast preferences as a detail worth remembering, because the person it belonged to mattered. More pages, many lines crossed out, many not. Send money to repair the furnace before winter. Do not sign the name. Do not call if she is still angry. Wait until next month. Gloria closed the notebook and carried it out of the greenhouse into the afternoon light that lay across the knee-high grass. She went back into the house and stood in the kitchen holding the leather notebook and the cloth-covered notebooks and the tin box of slips, surrounded by the evidence of a woman who had spent decades performing 2 kinds of care simultaneously. One for strangers who paid to sleep under her roof, and one for a family that did not know it was being cared for at all. Her phone vibrated. A text from Claire. Have you met Warren Hale yet? He contacted me this morning. If the price is decent, sign it. You can't stay there forever. A man she had never heard of had already contacted her daughter about a property Gloria had owned for less than a week. She typed several words, deleted them, typed again. Sent only, I haven't decided yet. The reply came immediately. Haven't decided what? You went there to solve a problem, not to live inside someone else's memories. Gloria set the phone down beside the tin box. She ate half a muffin to settle her hunger, then took the key and went outside. The evening had cooled. She walked around the side of the house to the north to a section of exterior walls she hadn't examined. The wood paneling here was different, darker, as if replaced at a different time, the grain running in another direction. She ran her hand along it. The seams were tighter than elsewhere, fitted with a precision that suggested someone had wanted this section to look like wall and nothing more. She went back inside and took Frank's old measuring tape from the toolbox in the trunk. The same Stanley tape he'd carried in his back pocket for 30 years. The case scratched and dented, the blade still accurate. She measured from the staircase door to the corner of the room, then measured the same distance from inside the hallway. The numbers did not match. The difference, perhaps 2 feet, told her that behind that paneling, there was space the house was not admitting to. She did not try to break through. She searched the lower floor, methodically opening drawers and cabinets and checking behind paintings. Near the end of the hallway, beneath a faded landscape painting, she found a low wall cabinet she had overlooked. In the bottom drawer, between old tablecloths and half-used candles, whose wax had softened and rehardened into new shapes, her fingers found a small brass key tied with a tarnished silver string. Attached to the string was a tag of stiff paper, and on the tag, in Rose Calloway's handwriting, "Family Room. Open only when you are ready to stay longer than a weekend." She put the key in her pocket next to Frank's prescription receipt and climbed the stairs to the second floor. Whatever was behind that wall would still be there tomorrow. But the letters in Rose's bedroom, she sensed they had waited for years beyond counting. And the woman who had written them was no longer alive to worry about whether they'd be found. The last door opened onto a room that did not look abandoned at all. On the bed, a cream-colored blanket worn soft at the edges. On the bedside table, reading glasses with wire frames. A small wind-up clock stopped at 3:20 and a hardcover novel placed face down at its midpoint, holding a place that would never be returned to. The wardrobe door stood slightly open. 2 wool dresses, the color of winter sky, a gray coat with bone buttons, a wide-brimmed hat tied with a ribbon, faded from burgundy to dusty rose. This was not a room that had been left. It was a room whose occupant had simply stopped being in it. Gloria pulled open the dressing table drawer. A tortoiseshell comb missing 2 teeth. Handkerchiefs folded into squares, so precise they might have been ironed that morning. And a stack of envelopes bound with a silver ribbon. On the first envelope, in handwriting she now knew as well as her own, was not her full name. Not Gloria Whitman. Just Gigi. No one had called her that in decades. She sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress sighing beneath her, with the particular sound of old springs accepting a weight they had not felt in a long time. She untied the ribbon. It slid free with almost no resistance, as though it had been tied loosely on purpose. The first letter was dated more than 10 years earlier. The handwriting was firm, though Gloria could detect in certain letters a tremor so slight it might have been emotion rather than age. Dear Gigi, I'm writing this letter without knowing whether I will send it. Perhaps I should have spoken much earlier when you were younger, and I was less proud. Your mother hates this house because she believes it stole my youth. Perhaps she also hates me because I did not leave with her when I still could have. But there are places that hold a person not out of duty, but because they are the only place where that person knows she once belonged. There were no grand declarations, no elaborate defenses. Only a voice less guarded than Gloria had been, led to expect almost clumsy in places where it approached family stumbling over sentiment, the way a person stumbles over furniture in a dark room they know by heart but haven't entered in years. At the end, I still hear news of you through the foolish roundabout ways our family has always used instead of sitting down and speaking plainly. I know you work at the hospital. I know you married a man a few years younger than you. I know your daughter liked to draw when she was little. I know these things and still could not walk through the door of my own making. That is my fault. Gloria noticed the phrasing work at the hospital and understood that Rose had heard the fact through family gossip, distorted by distance. Gift counter nurse hospital worker. The details blurred as they traveled from mouth to mouth the way a message changes in a children's game of telephone. Rose had known the shape of Gloria's life without ever seeing it clearly. And that imprecision made the caring feel more real, not less the effort of someone reaching through fog. She placed the letter on her lap and looked toward the window. The last light clung to the edge of the glass. She picked up the second letter, then the third. Some were short, barely half a page, as if Rose had sat down with something to say and then lost the nerve. Some had been started and abandoned mid-sentence. Some contained only questions that pretend to be casual, but carry the full weight of years. Does your back still ache when the weather turns cold? Does Claire still like apple pie? Gloria gathered the letters and retied the ribbon, but did not return them to the drawer. She slipped them into her coat pocket, where they settled against the prescription receipt, and for a moment, the two documents lay together in the dark of the fabric. Two people reaching toward her from different kinds of absence, neither having managed to say what they meant while alive. She went downstairs and searched through the remaining envelopes in the dressing table drawer. One was addressed to no one. No date, no name. She opened it and found a single sentence written in the center of the page, surrounded by white space, as if the words needed room to breathe. If Gigi finds the key, then the girl has gone farther than anything I imagined. Gloria folded the paper and put it with the others. Then she went to the north hallway, stood in front of the panel, and found the lock hidden beneath a raised molding so small and precisely fitted that it would have been invisible to anyone not looking for it, or anyone who had not been led to it step by a woman who had spent her life hiding care inside ordinary things. She inserted the key and turned it. A dry click sounded inside the wall, not loud but definitive. She placed her hand on the panel and pushed. It shifted to the left, resisted, stopped. She braced her shoulder against it and pushed harder. Dust fell in soft cascades, and the gap widened enough for her to step through. The space was not what she had expected. She had imagined storage and old closets sealed during a renovation. Instead, she found a small room nearly square windowless with a ceiling-mounted lamp with a frosted glass shade. She found the switch. The light came on warm and low, and the room revealed itself. It was a sitting room, private, built not for guests but for the person who took care of guests. An armchair in faded green velvet, a couch with a wool blanket, a round tea table, two low bookshelves filled with the kind of books people actually read, paperbacks with broken spines, hardcovers with coffee rings. In the corner, a small upright piano, its keys yellowed, but its surface polished, and on top of it, a framed photograph. A stopped mantel clock and a porcelain bowl filled with buttons of every size and color. On the couch lay a patchwork quilt made from fabric scraps that Gloria recognized instinctively as the remnants of clothing. Blue gingham that might have been a dress, gray wool matching the coat upstairs. Yellow cotton printed with small flowers that looked like something a child would wear. Beneath the tea table sat a large wooden box with brass hinges. On the walls, photographs were clipped to ribbons stretched horizontally with small wooden clothespins, informal, intimate, meant to be handled and rearranged and added to. The first photograph on the left ribbon showed two young women standing in front of a lake. Their hair was lifted by wind, the hems of their summer dresses caught mid-motion, and they were laughing, not posed, but genuinely laughing. The shorter woman was Dorothy. Gloria recognized her immediately in the nose, the eyes, the particular way she held her chin slightly raised, as if daring the world. The other was Rose, younger than any version Gloria had imagined. Her face turned halfway aside, but her mouth curved in a smile so unguarded, it looked like a different person. In all the years of Gloria's childhood, no one had mentioned that the two sisters had once stood together, like that easily, happily, without the weight of whatever eventually drove them to opposite ends of a silence that lasted decades. She sat in the armchair and opened the wooden box. Inside, arranged with the organizational precision she now recognized as Rose's signature envelopes, thin photograph albums, photocopied birth certificates, postcards, money transfer receipts, birthday cards, and at the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, children's drawings made with crayons whose colors had faded to ghosts of themselves. One stack of envelopes was tied with a blue ribbon. The tag read, "For the years that were lost." Gloria untied the ribbon. The first letter was addressed to Dorothy but bore no postmark, never mailed. Rose had written about inviting her younger sister back to the guest house that summer, giving her the room overlooking the apple garden, baking pie, and making iced tea the way they had when they were girls. Then just beneath that passage, the ink shifted, the pen lifted, and sat down at a different angle, as though Rose had paused, looked out a window and come back carrying something heavier. "But you will not come if I write as though nothing happened. I know that." The second item was a bank receipt from more than 30 years ago, money transferred to a furnace repair company in Detroit. Attached with a rusted paperclip, a note on guest house stationery, winter in Michigan, does not spare a woman raising a small child. Gloria held the receipt in both hands. This was the money that had fixed the furnace the winter she was 11. The money Dorothy had attributed to a church fund. The money that kept them warm through January and February while Detroit hardened into iron and ice outside the windows. The third item stopped her breathing. A tuition bill from a children's art school in Detroit, Little Sparks Creative Academy. And in the upper right corner, written in Rose's hand, the name Claire. On the back, the girl draws houses a great deal. I hope she always has a place to draw. Gloria pressed her fingers against her eyes. Claire had attended a drawing class at 6 weeks of Saturday mornings in a studio that smelled like tempera paint. Then the money ran out. Gloria and Frank had assumed the payment came from a community grant, one of those small anonymous kindnesses that surface in neighborhoods where people look out for each other. It had been Rose the entire time. She reached into the bottom of the box. One more envelope, smaller than the others, different paper. On the front, in handwriting that was not Rose's, a single name, Rose. She knew the handwriting before she consciously identified it. The right word leaned the way the letters pressed hard at the beginning of each word and lightened toward the end. Frank. The letter inside was half a page on lined paper torn from a legal pad, the kind Frank kept in the kitchen drawer for grocery lists. "Dear Mrs. Calloway, I am the husband of Gloria. I found out about you from the old receipts that Dorothy left behind when she passed. I did not tell Gloria because I believe you would want to tell your own story in your own time. But I wanted you to know that this family is still here. And the house you sent the furnace money for, it is still warm every winter." Dated 6 months before Frank died. 6 months before the cancer closed his throat and took his voice and left him communicating in gestures and blinks. And at the very end, in 4 words scrawled on the back of a prescription receipt, "Remember to call Rose." He had known. The quiet man who fixed pipes and hummed Motown and never once mentioned Rose Calloway in 31 years of marriage had found the receipts after Dorothy's death, pieced the story together, and reached out not with accusations, but with a single message: "We are still here." He had written to Rose not to confront her, but to comfort her, and he had kept it secret not out of deception, but out of a respect so deep it amounted to faith. Faith that the truth would find its way to the right person at the right time, even if he was no longer alive to witness it. Gloria placed the letter on the tea table and sat with her hands in her lap. She understood now why Frank had written those 4 words. Not as a reminder to himself, by then he was too sick for phone calls, but as a message to her left where he knew she would eventually find it. A breadcrumb on a trail that led from a pharmacy receipt in Detroit to a hidden room in upstate New York, from a dead man's handwriting to a dead woman's archive of invisible love. She whispered his name into the room, and the cedar-scented air absorbed it completely the way it had absorbed decades of silence before. The sound of a car on gravel broke the stillness. Not the gentle crunch of someone arriving carefully, but the hard, fast sound of someone who had driven a long way on a decision made in urgency. Then a car door slammed. Gloria stood, gathered Frank's letter and the tuition bill and the furnace receipt into the box, and stepped through the gap in the paneling. She pulled the panel nearly closed, not all the way, leaving a crack just wide enough to find again, and walked into the center of the house. Claire was standing in the living room. She had not taken off her jacket. Her handbag was still on her shoulder, the strap cutting a diagonal across her chest, and her face carried the expression of someone who has driven 3.5 hours on a decision made in frustration, and is now standing in the place where frustration has to either justify itself or dissolve. Behind her, half hidden by her hip, Theo peered around his mother's body at the room with the wide curiosity of a 9-year-old encountering a space that does not conform to anything in his experience. The boy was taller than the last time Gloria had seen him at Thanksgiving, when he'd sat building a tower out of dinner rolls while the adults talked about refinancing. His dark hair fell across his forehead, and he held a comic book rolled into a tube. "You didn't say you were coming. I wasn't sure I should. But you texted, 'I haven't decided yet,' and then went dark. I had to come see what was happening." Theo edged closer to his grandmother. His voice was quieter than Claire's, pitched at the frequency of someone who understood their adults were having a conversation with sharp edges. "Grandma, this house is really big." Gloria rested her hand on the boy's shoulder. "Are you tired from the drive?" "No. Mum got me French fries at the rest stop." Claire set her bag on the chair with a thud louder than necessary. "Mom, don't change the subject. I'm not changing it. You just arrived." "Exactly. And you're staying in a rotting house that belonged to someone who almost never cared about this family, while there's a purchase offer sitting right in front of you." Gloria looked at her daughter, at the tension in her shoulders, the circles under her eyes that spoke of single parenthood, and the kind of exhaustion that calcifies into impatience. She recognized all of it because she had lived all of it. "You don't know the whole story. Then tell me." Gloria did not answer with words. She walked to the end of the hallway, placed her hand on the panel, and pushed it open. The warm light from inside spilled into the corridor. Claire looked at the opening, then at her mother. "There's a room you need to see before you tell me to sign anything." Claire stepped through the gap the way a person steps onto ice weight, held back, one foot committed, and the rest of the body waiting for permission. Theo followed without hesitation, slipping past his mother into the room with the fluid certainty of a child who has not yet learned to distrust unfamiliar places. The light received them both. Claire's eyes did what they always did: inventory, categorize, assess. The armchair, the couch, the bookshelves, the piano, the wooden box on the tea table, the photographs clipped to ribbons on the wall. Her gaze moved across each object, and then it stopped. On the far wall, pinned between a faded snapshot and a bent Christmas card, was a piece of paper covered in crayon. A yellow house, smoke curling from a chimney in the wobbly, optimistic spirals that only children draw. Beside the front door, 3 figures standing close together, their bodies made of straight lines and circles, their smiles wider than their faces. Theo pointed. "That looks like the kind of thing I used to draw in first grade." Claire stepped closer. In the lower corner, in pencil pressed so hard it had grooved the surface, 3 words in the unsteady hand of a child who had only recently learned to spell her own name: Claire, Mom, Dad. She stood in front of it with her arms at her sides. Gloria saw the exact moment something shifted behind her daughter's eyes, not a softening, not yet, but a fracture in the surface of a certainty she had carried into this house like luggage. Claire pulled back from the wall and picked up the envelopes tied with the blue ribbon. She weighed them in her hand, pulled the first letter free, and read, standing up. Then she pulled over the iron chair, sat down, and started the second. Theo moved from object to object with systematic curiosity. He studied the photographs, touched the piano keys without pressing them, picked up buttons from the porcelain bowl, and sorted them by color on the couch arm. Occasionally, he looked at his mother's face, checking the weather. There, the way children do, reading adult emotion with instruments more sensitive than anything science has produced. When Claire finished the second letter, she looked up. The tension in her face had changed character, shifting from readiness to argue to the hollowed stillness of someone who has learned a fact that rearranges other facts. She paid for my drawing class. Her voice was flat, stripped of inflection. It seems so. And the furnace money. Gloria nodded. Claire pressed her thumb against the bridge of her nose. Frank's gesture, the thing he did when processing something that didn't fit. Why didn't anyone tell us? Maybe because no one knew, or maybe because someone did know and found it easier to keep being angry than to admit the anger had been wrong. Claire picked up the tuition bill with her own name in Rose's handwriting. She turned it over and read the sentence on the back. The girl draws houses a great deal. I hope she always has a place to draw. And something crossed her face that was not quite grief and not quite recognition, but some compound of both, an emotion that only occurs when you discover that a stranger loved you. She set the bill down and her jaw tightened again, reassembling its armor. Keeping a drawing and paying a tuition bill are not the same as being present. It's easier to mail a check than to knock on someone's door. A lot easier. Gloria did not argue. She let the words stand in the room for a moment, acknowledging their weight. Because Claire was not wrong, she was only incomplete. Then she reached into the box and pulled out the last envelope, the one with Frank's handwriting, and held it out. Claire took it, unfolded the lined paper. Read the half-page letter her father had written 6 months before his death to a woman Claire had never heard of, in handwriting she had last seen on grocery lists, and the note taped to the bathroom mirror. The morning of her wedding. Be happy. That's all. Just be happy. She read the letter once, then again. Then she set it on the table with a care that bordered on reverence, smoothing the creases with her palm the way one smooths a map of a country one has only just learned exists. Dad knew, he knew, and he chose to let Rose tell her own story. Claire sat with that. The stopped clock on the piano offered no measurement, and without its ticking, the room existed in a kind of temporal suspension, not frozen, but floating. Theo had settled on the rug with a stack of photographs, arranging them in rows. The way he arranged baseball cards at home, creating a taxonomy of faces he did not recognize, but seemed instinctively to understand were connected to him. Gloria watched her daughter processing. She could see the resistance still working, Claire's jaw moving slightly, her fingers pressing into the wood of the chair arm, and she did not rush it. Some doors took longer to open than others. Some had to be pushed against before they could be walked through. Claire looked at the crayon drawing again, then at the furnace receipt, then at Frank's letter. 3 pieces of evidence from 3 different decades, each one contradicting the story she had carried her entire adult life. The story that Rose was selfish, distant, irrelevant. Against that story stood a check for a furnace, a bill for an art class, and a letter from her own father, written in the last months of his life, a man whose judgment Claire had never once questioned. She could dismiss Rose. She could dismiss Gloria. But she could not dismiss Frank. When she spoke, her voice had lost its edge but gained something heavier. I kept thinking you were holding on to a place that had nothing to do with us. But it turns out I'm the one who knew nothing about what this family actually was. Theo held out a photograph toward Gloria, arm extended straight the way children present discoveries, without ceremony, without doubt. Grandma is this mom when she was little. The photograph showed a girl of about 7, wearing a blue coat, standing in the back garden of this house, holding a wicker basket of apples. Her hair was shorter than Claire wore it now, and her expression was the open look of a child who has not yet learned to compose her face for cameras. Gloria held the photograph beside her daughter's face. It must be from the time your grandmother Dorothy brought you here. Claire shook her head slowly. I only vaguely remember. There was a long car ride, the smell of cinnamon in a kitchen, a cat lying on the doorstep. Its name was Biscuit. Your grandmother told that story once. It was one of the only times she mentioned this house without her voice going tight. What are you going to do? The question arrived without preamble, stripped of advice. Gloria recognized it as the first genuinely open question Claire had asked since walking in. "I'm not selling the entire property to Warren Hale." Claire's eyebrows drew together, but she did not immediately object. "The bills in Detroit are not going to disappear." "I know." Gloria placed her hand on the lid of the wooden box. "There are documents in here, a small savings fund. Rose set up some old bonds in her name and usage rights to the land behind the greenhouse. Not enough to live comfortably, but enough to work with." She told Claire about Naomi, the local lawyer, whose business card she had found tucked inside the bond certificates in the box, as if Rose had placed it there for exactly this purpose. Tomorrow morning, town office. The plan: sell the empty northern parcel to the local council who had wanted to open a public walking path to the river for years. Keep the main house, the greenhouse, the back garden. The proceeds from the land sale, combined with Rose's savings and the bonds, would cover the overdue taxes and most of the medical debt in Detroit. But not all of it. Gloria would not be able to replace the car. She would still take weekend shifts for at least another year. The bills would shrink slowly, stubbornly, like a snowbank in March. She was not choosing the easier arithmetic. She was choosing the arithmetic that left room for something other than numbers. And this house. "I'm keeping it. For what? So it doesn't become a parking lot for weekend visitors. So this family has one clear place to come back to when it needs to. And so I don't have to pretend one more time that what was lost should stay lost." Gloria heard in her own voice an echo of something Frank had said once, standing in the kitchen doorway, with a dish towel over his shoulder and steam rising from the sink behind him. "A house doesn't need to be big. It just needs someone who wants to come back to it. Can we come here in the summer?" Theo's voice rose from the floor, where he sat cross-legged among his rows of photographs. Claire looked at her son, then at the photograph of herself at 7. The blue coat, the basket of apples, the garden that still existed beyond these walls, overgrown but alive. She looked at Frank's letter on the table. Her jaw worked once, twice. Then the tension in her shoulders released, not all at once, but in stages, the way a fist unclenches finger by finger. "I'm not promising anything right now." Her voice was slower, the words chosen one at a time. "But maybe." Gloria accepted the word without pressing. Maybe was enough. Maybe was the most honest word Claire could have offered, the word of a woman willing to leave a door open, but not yet ready to walk through it. Who understood perhaps for the first time that walking through doors was something this family had always found difficult, and that the difficulty was not a flaw but a sign that the doors mattered. The next morning, Gloria drove to the town office and sat across a desk from Naomi, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain and a handshake that meant business. The paperwork for the northern parcel took 2 hours. The council had been interested in that land for a decade, and the price they offered was fair, not generous, but honest, which was better. Gloria signed where Naomi pointed, initialed, where Naomi circled, and left the office with a folder of copies and a timeline for the tax payment that no longer felt like a countdown. Back at the house, she called Warren Hale. She put the phone on the table between the muffin plates and the open letters, and Claire and Theo listened from the kitchen. "Mrs. Whitman." His voice came through with the polished clarity of a man who had practiced making his voice sound like a handshake. "I wanted to ask whether you'd had a chance to look at the offer." "Yes." "Good. If you're agreeable, I can bring the updated contract by this afternoon." "That won't be necessary." A pause brief, the length of a single heartbeat. "I won't be selling the entire property to you." His voice lowered. "You're passing up a very practical opportunity. I'm choosing a different one." She told him about the plan: Naomi, the northern parcel; the council, the river path. She spoke in the flat, clear language of a woman who had done her arithmetic and did not need it checked. Warren listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet, and when he spoke, something underneath the smoothness had shifted. "I understand. If you change your mind, you have my number." Gloria thought of what June had told her, that Warren had grown up nearby, that his father had once leased land from the property, that he had known this house as a boy. before he learned to see it as an investment. And she thought of something else June had mentioned in passing, almost as an afterthought, that Rose had called Warren once near the end and asked him whether he would keep the house. He had said yes, and Rose had told him he was not the right person. Mr. Hale, I heard that Rose called you before she died. She asked if you would keep this house, and you said yes. She told you that you weren't the right person. The silence on the other end lasted longer this time. When Warren spoke again, the polish was gone, set aside voluntarily, the way a man removes a hat when he enters a room where something true is happening. She was a difficult woman to understand, but she was usually correct. A breath. Then quieter, I understand too. The call ended. Gloria turned off the phone and set it on the table. Claire looked at her from across the kitchen, and something passed between them that did not require words. An acknowledgement that the decision was made and that it was right, and that rightness in this case did not mean ease. It meant choosing the harder arithmetic, because the numbers that mattered most were not the ones that appeared on invoices. That afternoon, Gloria changed into the oldest clothes she had packed. She found a claw hammer in the utility room, a box of galvanized nails and a pry bar with a rubber grip that had cracked but still held. She climbed the porch steps and knelt beside the section of railing that leaned the worst three spindles loose. The top rail split where water had worked its way into the grain and thawed, and frozen again over more winters than she could count. She pulled the first rotted spindle free. The wood came apart in her hands, soft and fibrous, and she set the pieces aside and measured the gap with Frank's tape. The good lumber from the utility room closet left over boards Rose had stored, wrapped in plastic as if she'd known someone would need them, was close enough in width. Gloria marked the cut with a pencil, braced the board against the porch step, and sawed by hand, the blade singing through clean pine. Claire appeared in the doorway, holding her phone against her shoulder mid-conversation. She watched her mother work for a moment, then covered the receiver. I'm on hold with a plumber in town. June gave me the number. He can come look at the kitchen pipes Thursday. Gloria nodded without looking up, fitting the new spindle into the gap, testing the alignment with her palm. Theo came around the corner of the house, carrying a rusted paint can he'd found in the greenhouse. Its lid pried open to reveal a half-inch of dried white paint at the bottom. Grandma, is there more paint somewhere? I want to start on the window boxes. Gloria sat back on her heels and looked at the boy, paint on his fingers, already sawdust on his knees, from kneeling beside her on the porch, his dark hair pushed back from his forehead with a dirty hand. Check the shelf in the utility room. There might be a can that's still good. If not, we'll get some tomorrow. Theo disappeared around the corner. Claire finished her call and stepped onto the porch, surveying the railing. You know this is going to take months. I know. You can't do it alone. I know that too. Claire knelt beside her mother and picked up the pry bar. She tested the next spindle it held barely and moved to the one after that, which came free with a groan of old nails releasing their grip. She set it aside and reached for the measuring tape. They worked without speaking for a while, the only sounds the tap of the hammer, the rasp of the saw. And from somewhere behind the house, Theo's voice calling out that he'd found a can of blue paint was blue. Okay. Could he start now? Gloria called back that blue was fine, and she heard the clatter of a brush being pulled from a jar, and then the particular quiet of a child concentrating on a task that feels important. The afternoon light came through the porch rails in long stripes that moved across the floorboards as the sun traveled west. Gloria straightened up and stretched her back and looked out at the property. The front garden with its wild grass, the stone path, the trees that framed the road. The mailbox at the end of the drive where a thick envelope had never arrived because Rose had never sent one. Behind the house, she could hear Theo talking to himself as he painted, narrating his progress the way children do when they believe the work matters and no one is judging. Claire was on her knees beside the railing, her sleeves pushed up, her hair falling out of its clip, her phone abandoned on the step beside her. Gloria picked up another board and marked the cut. The saw bit into the pine, and the sound traveled through her arms and into her shoulders. And she thought about Frank, about his hands that were always working, always fixing, always making something hold together that wanted to come apart. She thought about Rose alone in this house for decades, mending coats without being asked, sending money without signing her name, writing letters she never mailed to a family that never knew she was watching. She thought about Dorothy, who had carried her anger all the way to the grave and never once looked back to see what she had left behind. And she thought about the room behind the wall, the armchair, the quilt made of dresses, the photographs clipped to ribbons, the bowl of buttons, the letters tied with blue ribbon addressed to years that were lost. The room Rose had built not to hide something, but to preserve it, to keep the evidence of love safe from the family's talent for forgetting. The new spindle fit snugly into the gap. Gloria hammered the nail in 3 clean strokes, tap, tap, drive, and the wood held. She ran her hand along the top rail and felt the difference between the old grain and the new, the dark and the light, the years that had weathered and the years that were just beginning. From the back of the house came Theo's voice, high and clear in the cooling air. "Grandma, come see. I did the first box. It's blue." Gloria set down the hammer. She stood on the porch of a house that was hers now. Hers to keep, hers to repair, hers to fill with the sounds of hammering and painting, and a boy's voice calling from the garden. Behind her, Claire was measuring the next gap in the railing with the competent focus of a woman who solves problems for a living, and who had finally found a problem worth solving that could not be reduced to numbers on a spreadsheet. The sun was dropping toward the tree line. The shadows of the branches stretched across the grass. Somewhere inside the house, behind a panel of wood that looked like wall and nothing more, a room waited with its pale light and its photographs and its letters and its quilt, made from the clothes of a woman who had understood something that most people spend their whole lives failing to learn, that love does not require an audience, and that the deepest acts of care are often the ones performed in secret, without signature, without expectation of return, offered into the silence between 2 people who cannot find the words and so find other ways. Gloria walked down the porch steps and around the house to where Theo knelt beside a window box painted an uneven, joyful blue, his brush still wet, his face turned up toward her, with the uncomplicated pride of someone who has just made something better than it was. She knelt beside him and looked at the blue. It was the color of a coat in a photograph, the color of a ribbon around a stack of letters, the color of a winter sky seen through a window that someone had paid to keep warm. It was a good color. It was the right color. And the house, Rose's house, Dorothy's house, Frank's house, Gloria's house, Claire's house, Theo's house, stood around them in the late light. Its porch half mended, its windows half open, its story half told, waiting for the rest.